All right, now I think I'm live. All right, I am live. Cool. So I'm going to take a second because it just started, but I might as well talk a little. So I think today, I know today what we're going to do is go over a responsive menu. So there's like tons of ways to do it. Really kind of depends on your app design, but I'm just going to pick away, build it, and then hopefully when we're done, if it all works, we'll have a pattern and some videos that we can share to show people in the future, because we get this request a lot. Just the mechanics, the like concepts behind a mobile menu, and from this hopefully you'll get the concepts and then you can customize it to your app. Should probably start a screen share and get this set up really quick. Okay. Sorry, bear with me. I'm just making sure it's the right size and everything. I think that's good, actually. So yeah, if you can't see that screen well, I don't know if it's pixelated for everyone else, but it's a little pixelated for me. But we should have, let me just check my settings, because we should have higher quality video this week. I don't know much about StreamYard. That's what we're using for this. It's a bit pixelated. I'm not really sure how to get my screen less pixelated. I don't see settings for that specifically, but maybe I can make it as big as possible. It's really hard to do this because I can't see my full screen. So I think like that, it's probably as big as I can make it. It still looks the same. Yeah, I'm not sure. I might have to just keep going because I just don't know enough. I'd be fumbling around live. Yeah, I don't really see any other options. No, wait, one last thing to check here. Nope. Full screen. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's the best I'm going to get it for right now. All right, I'm going to go. All right, so let's get started. So basically what I have is a totally blank project, and I'm just going to hop in there and start building out and talking about what I'm doing as I'm building. If you have any questions or you want to like divert it a little, feel free, just chat in there. I have it open on the right. I think I'll be able to see it. If not, somebody on the Builder team can Slack me and I'll get that. But I'm just going to go for it. So the first thing I'm going to do is start here on a totally blank project. Put a page on the canvas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build this as if it were for a real application. So I'm going to first make this the home page, and I'm going to make a separate page as a component on the home page. So the reason I'm going to do that is because if you're making an application or a website, as you build and you get more pages, you want to include that header as a component on every page. And that way you can change it in one spot and it'll update for all your pages. And all the stuff we're about to do for changing the layout of it for mobile, that can all get done in that one spot in the header. You don't have to replicate that on every page. So for now, to look at this, I'm just going to insert an image into here, and I'm using there are a few like big icons that look a little weird in there. I'm using our dev environment right now, so there might be some weird stuff popping up. I'm not sure if I click that. Not sure exactly what it's doing here. I think it's frozen a little bit. Maybe I shouldn't be using our dev environment. This is going to come out pretty soon, these changes. Oh, weird. I just did this as a test. Yeah, something's wrong with it. These changes are going to come out very soon, so I wanted to do this demo with the new layout. So hopefully I don't have to switch back. I'm just going to refresh the page because actually I noticed like it doesn't have its primary style and that something was up with that. Good start. Something's up with it. Shouldn't be taking this long. I'm just going to create a brand new project. You get to see a little sneak peek of the dashboard, although this one doesn't look as good because I don't have any of these images filled out. Maybe something's actually going on because we're all actively working on this release. So maybe something's broken right now because it's not loading. All right, there it goes. Maybe now it'll be back. Let me test that one that I was just in. Still slow. Markins are in there sabotaging stuff. They might be doing like some kind of crazy calculation on the server or something too, and who knows what. Maybe it's just slow. Something's up with it. It's kind of slow. I really don't want to switch back. I guess it's not that bad, but it'd be a little unfortunate because some of the layout changed. So we wanted to use this video in the future. So I really hope that this will kind of kick in here. Biggest performance changes. It's hard to say. It's hard to say exactly, but there actually have been a lot of little performance updates that together make it seem really fast. And even like opening projects and doing other things is a lot faster. The studio doesn't lock up. Sometimes if you work on a really big project right now with a lot of elements, it actually locks up here and there. So we fixed all that stuff. So it feels a lot snappier, but I think the biggest difference is going to be that there's this menu now on the top and a lot of stuff is built off of that menu. So it's not like the same UI, and the UI just using it feels a lot snappier. It feels more intuitive. So I'm looking forward to getting it out. Different user types, different options. I can probably touch on showing different user types, seeing different options. We'll see how long this whole thing takes, especially with this slow start. But that's something I can at least describe how to do it quickly, if not walk through and set it all up. But I'll do that at the end. So it looks like it did work because now it looks correct. Something was just up with it then. Oh, man, it might still be slow. I'm just going to continue on if I can. Unless maybe something's wrong with these and they won't delete. Oh, there they go. And then just in the comments, I'm seeing Bill's continues asking about the different headers. Like, would we create different headers and display them or change individual elements? It literally is personal preference. So if I was doing something where the header was like completely different, I might make a whole separate header. But if I was doing something where just like one or two elements is slightly changing, I would definitely just change the elements. It really depends. And then also it depends on how complex your menu is. So if you have a menu with a million submenus, you wouldn't want to double that header and have to maintain two of those. So then maybe it's more advantageous to just change the style of the single menu. So it comes down to preference and how your app's set up and like how familiar you are with like CSS and that kind of thing too. Because if you have CSS knowledge, especially on this level of stuff, It goes a long way and kind of dictates how you build a lot of the time. All right, so let me start over. Really, all I was trying to do on this was add an image in here so that we could visually see it. Yeah. Let me try to add an image to this page. Maybe that page is messed up. Maybe the image element itself is messed up. Oh. That's for the image on the side. Something's just slow. We were just chatting in Slack, and I don't know if actually that might have flashed up on my screen, but they don't think they're breaking anything. Huh. I'm just gonna start in a fresh project, and then if not, I'll just cut back to Bildr dev. That went fast. I guess it was cached. Oh no, it didn't. See, the header didn't load. Sorry, everyone. This is kind of a weird start. I'm selecting a div at the bottom. Just every other div open still. I'm not sure what you mean by that on the elements specifically. Because if so, that probably works exactly the same for now. We're gonna basically we'll go through the whole studio and refresh almost everything. Just kind of like at least take a fresh look at everything. But for now, we started on some major areas, and then over time, like it'll probably take a long time, we'll slowly upgrade. All right, so let me just create a new project. Even this, I think, is too slow. I think something's up with it. Yeah, this is too slow. They're talking in the Slack. They're going to potentially reset the server for me, but if not, maybe we'll reschedule this. And if we reschedule, I can also just stay on a minute and answer questions if you want, or try to show other stuff, whatever makes sense. They're going to restart it quick now. Maybe you saw that. I don't know if you see that Slack coming up on my screen or not, but it's hard to remember I'm live streaming. I think while we're sitting here, I'm going to check some of these settings. Ah. That's the restart. It's in progress. Live builds are crazy, but also live building in dev is kind of ridiculous. But we're really close. It's a pretty stable dev environment right now. Usually this doesn't happen. It's got to be dev though in this case. Trying to get a lot more efficient with our content and do stuff the right way. So the last thing I want to do for this is switch back to Bildr and then have a beat not useful in a week or 2 weeks or whatever. All right, let's see how it goes now. I feel like it's still slow, but let me clear out the cache. Well, they're saying it feels fast. Let's see. Maybe I'm the one that breaks it. Maybe when I try to open something, it breaks. I don't know. Like this image isn't showing up, but these are going a little faster. Let me see if I delete it. No, that was fast. All right, so let's see if it's back. I'm just gonna back. All right, there we go. So hopefully we're back. So that was a crazy false start, but I'm just gonna pick up. I'm just gonna go. It's 17 minutes gone, but that's okay. We'll try to cut that out, or probably cut this up anyway. So what I did to refresh was I added a home page, and then I added a second page for the header so that we can use the header in a component. And all I wanted to do as a first step was just show it. So I inserted an image, and I'm just going to add an inline style to give it a width, a max width of 100 pixels, just to show this header. So now on my home page here, well, it's got those tests from before. Now on my home page here, I insert a component, and I set it to the header page, and you can see I get that header there. That's how basically every page I make now in my app or my website, I can start with that header component and label it. Whoops. So anyway, I'm not going to really work on that page. Actually, maybe I'll just stick some other stuff so we can preview at this page, but I'm going to work in the header itself. Let's add section, container, and then div. And just as a side note, and if you haven't seen me do this before, section, container, div is something I do all the time. And section comes with this default section class, which is actually blank. Container comes with the default container class with some styles. And then I usually just throw a div in there. But what it is section is full width and container is a centered column. So if you kind of follow this convention, you obviously don't have to. You can code however you want. You know, it's free form, but if you follow this convention, it's kind of built into Bildr in a way where you can get nice sections down your page with a centered column that has a max width and is responsive. So, and you don't have to do anything. You just put section in and you put container. The magic happens because in container, we've got a max width and a margin left and right of auto. So anyway, if this is like a fake thing I'm building, but this is how I build anything on a page. And you'll see in the header, I'll even do the same thing with section, container, and then div. But really what I want to do here is just add a heading just so we can like see that it's a page. There we go. So now I'm going to come back in the header and actually build out the header. And again, like I think I mentioned in the beginning, or maybe I was talking to someone right before this, but the ways that you do this, like it's so open-ended and it depends on your preference and your design of your app, but there's a million ways to do a header and a million ways to do a mobile responsive header. So I'm just going to go for something pretty straightforward that is like hopefully easily customizable. So first thing that I want it to have a logo on the left and then a list of menu items on the right with a button as the last one, like a call to action button. So that's just like a pretty standard header. And then what I want to do is I want to have it be the centered column for the content, but have the header be a different color that's wide, because I feel like that's also a common use case. So I'm going to do that by creating a few, some structure in the header and a few styles. I'm just going to walk through that and try to explain it as best I can now. But, you know, if you have questions, feel free to stop me. So let's see. So the first thing I'll do, I'm going to leave this image here. I'm going to move it in a second. But the first thing I'll do is what I just mentioned with section and then container. If you want, you can put a header element, because the header element is actually a section element, but it's semantically it's header. So that might be better for like a screen reader or potentially for Google when it crawls your site. But really, they're the same exact thing. So I can put a section or a header. I'll do the header just because we're in the header. And then inside of it, a container. And then here, I'm going to make a div, and this div is going to be like the outer of the header menu. It's what's going to put the logo and the text side by side, that kind of thing. It's like the container for the header menu. And the container for the header menu, that's where we're going to start to get into some of the styles and some of the trickier styles. So the first thing is I have a logo, and then I also have the menu, like like think of it as one block of a menu that might have several menu items and a call to action button. So I'm just going to kind of lay that out in the scaffolding. So this div here is like the header outer. And again, you can call this stuff whatever you want. I'll add one div here, which will be the logo. And then I'll duplicate that and have this one be the menu. Now I'll move that logo image into the logo div there, and the menu itself is going to be its own div with the menu items in it. And so I can even, I might as well just lay one of those out. And I'm doing this all with divs, but for different reasons, you might want to use different elements in here. Like there's, an A tag or a ULLI setup with like list items in HTML. There are other things, but I don't want to complicate this demo. So I'm just going to shoot some divs in here and keep it pretty straightforward. But you could customize any of this stuff is my point. So we have a menu, and then we'll have one or more menu items. I don't need to actually build these all out, but they'll be in here, and say that we'll put a link in one for now. So now you can see the header looks like this, where it's got the image and it's got what will be the menu. I can just do this so we can look at it. What will be the menu underneath it. I want to put those side by side, and I want to separate them apart. That's just CSS. So if you don't know CSS, this is where you'd have to look this stuff up. Normally, that's what I would do. In this case, I know how to do this CSS. So I'm going to start on this div header outer element, and I'm going to give it a primary style class. And I'm going to call it header outer. Got to create new. Header outer. And there's a couple ways to put things side by side. Most popular would be either flexbox or grid. So it's a display property, and you either do grid or flex. So if you were in all props under layout, you got this display as the first one. This is where you either set flex, you can see that already goes side by side, or grid, which is slightly different, and will put them side by side, but doesn't start off by default that way. The other thing you can do, if I clear that out, is if you're on used props and you're blank, you just search for display. Now, flex is a super easy way to do this because you can hit display flex, and then there's a property called justify content where you can go like this. And this is called space between or something, I think. Yeah, space between. So it separates it out completely. That's one way to do this. Or I tend to use, for something like this, I would actually use grid. The reason I wanted to show flex first is because sometimes it's easier just to use it and get it done, and you don't have to think about it. But I like to actually control the logo size with grid, and you can do other stuff with responsive. It's total personal preference. So just to show that, because I'm going to use flex for something else in here, just to show an example of that grid. If I switch this from flex to grid, then grid requires another property. So if you search for template columns, it's basically you specify your columns. And so this, again, if you don't know grid, if you go learn it, it'll be super useful. So you might want to just go learn it. But if you don't know grid, it's probably easier just to go to flex, because this stuff is it's a whole other concept of CSS grid that you have to learn. But if you want to learn it, definitely useful. But I would do something like this. I'd set up columns basically that say do a 100 pixel column, and then fill the rest of the space, one fractional width with the second column. And then you can put a gap, and you can do the gap actually with Flexbox too. I'll show that in a second, but maybe do a gap of 2 M's, or I don't really need it for now. Just space those out. And then the last thing I would have to do with CSS grid, because of the way this is set up on the actual logo menu, to move it to the right, I'll do something like this: margin left auto. So yeah, you might not want to do that. And this margin left auto, I'll put that in the menu class. I'm going to probably keep it this way just because I already built it out. So point is, you have a couple choices there. But for the actual menu itself, I definitely want to use Flexbox. And so I'll explain why. So let me just recap really quick, and then we'll go into that. So we did header outer, which is the container for the whole header. And we have a logo and a menu in it. And so this header outer has display grid, this grid template columns, and a gap. And it actually, when it's grid, it doesn't even need that justify content property there. So that's how we set up the general spec. And let's show it now at this point. So there we go. So that's, and you can see there's that centered column. My screen's bigger than the max width. So the logo is left, but it's not actually all the way left of the screen. So we got logo and the links. So now we're going to go into the menu itself, which is whatever's on the right side. And we're actually going to style that with Flexbox. So I'm going to add its own primary class, and we can call it header menu. And the important part here is we're going to say display flex. So that puts them side by side, and we'll give them a gap of maybe like 1em. So now whatever is in those boxes, this menu item box here that has a link, this menu item, whatever is in those, because this is Flexbox, it'll be the width of whatever's in it, and it'll have the, forget what I put already, 1em gap. The 1em gap in between and the width of the next. So it's a really handy way. You can just pop Flexbox on something like this. And then that way you don't have to worry about how many menu items you have. You don't have to worry about what's in them. If you want to put something bigger in them later, you can be more flexible here. And then to align these, I'm actually going to go back to this header outer, which has a grid. And this would be the same thing for Flexbox too. There's a property called align items, and you hit middle. And so now it looks pretty good. If I come back to my preview, I've got these here. I can put another menu item, but instead of a link, we'll drop a button in there. It'll be like sign up now type button. So that's like a basic structure of a menu. So the two, and that's basically, I would say, like bare minimum. Like if you get these styles on, you're in pretty good shape. But we'll add a few more styles, and I want to actually design it up a little bit. I want to give it a color, like I said, that goes full width. So I think what I'm going to do next is I'm going to add a little bit of the design. Then we'll do all the responsive work and maybe clean up some of the design if we want. But the other things I want to do is I want to add a drop down into one of these menus, just as an example. And then we can talk about switching this stuff out, like the question from the beginning of the build. So the first thing I'm going to do is change the colors of this menu. And I could do that. So on this header outer, which is the menu, I could come into here and give it a background color. Something like, I don't know, like that. But because that's inside of this container, it's going to look like this. So we don't actually want that. We want it to go full width. So what I need to do instead, I can remove this from here. I need this entire header, this entire section to have that background color. So I'm going to create a new base class. Instead of using this header default class, I guess I don't really, I could keep that now that I think about it. If I were using a section, I would add a new class, because I wouldn't want to use the same section for the header as everything else, because I'm making the header a different color. But actually, since I did this header element, it has its own unique class called header. It's totally blank. There's nothing on it. So I'm just going to piggyback on that. I'm going to use it. So for header, this is where we'll say background color that. Now, because we did it on the header, it's going to span the full width of the screen. That's what we want. And then I also think, because it's a darker color, that anything inside of it will make the color white. And I'll just be pretty generic in the styles right now. We can go be a little more specific after this. But you can see that it worked, but you can't tell it worked because I used links for these, and they're by default HTML makes them a color. So I think the next thing we'll do is go treat these links in this button, and then we'll have it looking like pretty decent, like a menu. So if I come into, so I have header menu as a class, which is just Flexbox with a gap. I also have menu items in here, and I'm going to give them a class because it's kind of like it's a block. It's something I'm going to want as a header menu item. This way, whatever is inside of that menu item can do its thing, live on its own, but that header menu item is always a thing. And then inside of it, there's a link here. I could use a text paragraph element. I could use a button. I could use other things and then use actions to make them work. In this case, I dropped a link in because the link, I can write the page URL right here and actually link to the other page. So it kind of works out. But typically in a menu, you don't want the link to look like this, to look like a standard link. You want it to design like the menu. So I'm also going to give these links a new class. I'm going to, instead of using the default link class that might be used in the rest of the build, I'll do this as a new class called header menu item link. So what I'm going to do really quick now, the first thing I'm going to do is remove those HTML defaults. So I'm going to say text decoration none. And I'm going to say color inherit. If you don't know these CSS things, that's just a CSS learning. Like I happen to know how to write those and what those are, but if you're doing it for the first time or if you're just learning this stuff, you might have to Google what these properties are. But what you do, like if for this one, the text has an underline, if you Google CSS, how to remove underline, it's going to tell you this property and this value. And in Bildr, if you're in use props, you just hit this new property and start typing the property name from your Google search. That's going to be a really fast way to just get this stuff done. You can find it at all props, but it's a little trickier to find sometimes if you don't know what the property is. All right, so that's for the link. And then what I'm also going to do, that basically is defaulted. So you can see it's white here now, or here. It's white instead of purple. But what I'm actually going to do too, because this is a menu item, I want it to be like big and clickable basically. I'm going to make this also be display block and a padding of 1em. You can see in the outline here, like it won't look like anything different here. It's just got a little bigger, but you can see where the cursor changes. It just gives it a little padding, makes it a little nicer to click on these. And now I think like for now, without going back and fine tuning, like that's pretty good for a link. And we can be a little more specific. We can be like, that's the home link. This is about, and this is pricing. And then now I just need to apply those classes I created. So this was menu item and then menu item link. Menu item, oops. Menu item link, menu item. And then this button, we have a default button class that can get used other places. I would say most of the time, or a lot of the time anyway, you'll have that same button in the header. But if you want to do a special header button that's specific, you can change this here to be like header menu CTA button. I'm just going to add a few kind of generic styles, like we'll remove the defaults of the button. I just know this is, again, just from CSS experience. Buttons have a border and an outline and a font family even. So I just go inherit. Inherit takes the property of whatever it's inherit. It inherits the property from its parent, basically. So if you ever need to like unset, there actually is a property in CSS called unset too, but I use inherit all the time. And that's just how I kind of like unset a property. And then this is a button. So let's make it just look a little different. We'll do background color. It would be like a light blue and padding. Do 1em. Something like that. And then the other thing, just to make sure this doesn't really look vertically centered, it could be a default thing coming off of that button, or it could be because I need to align items. Middle. Yeah. Well, whatever the reason was, that fixed it. And so that align items middle is actually the same thing I did up on the header outer to align those items vertically centered. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. If I look at it here, it looks like a menu. You can imagine a real logo there, and then these. And so you'd want to do stuff on hover, stuff like that. But for now, I think it makes sense to switch into actually showing how to convert this to responsive, because right now, if I go into a responsive mode, as the page shrinks, the header is going to do this, which is not correct. So what I'm going to set up is when you get to the iPad size, technically, which is 768, so it's going to be around here somewhere. When you get to about this size, we'll switch to a system with a hamburger menu trigger that slides in a full screen menu. So that'll look especially good at mobile where it takes over the whole screen. But I like to just do it one switch, so to where like even maybe on an iPad size, it might still use this mobile menu. Usually that's appropriate. If not, what you can do is you can do the same concept I'm doing and changing styles, but do it at all the different breakpoints and actually get really custom with how your menu functions as the screen gets smaller. But anyway, I'm just going to show the basics, like I said. So what I'm going to do is when the screen gets to 768 pixels, I'm going to take this header, this whole header div that has the darker color background. I'm going to take that whole thing and make it position absolute and make it 100% width, 100% height. So it's basically going to take over the full screen. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a class to that slides it off left. And that way, that gives us a mechanism. By adding and removing that class, we'll have a mechanism to slide the menu in and out. So I'll show all that, including there's like a CSS property transition that makes it animate in and out. And so what we'll do is we'll have something where as a screen shrinks, the header changes to be that full screen, but it starts hidden with a hidden class on it. And all you see is a hamburger menu or a menu that some kind of menu trigger. When you click it, it's going to remove the class, slide the menu in, and then that hamburger menu is going to switch to an X. If you click the X, it's going to slide the menu back off. And that's what we're going to do. And there's a few gotchas in there that I'm going to cover so that, if you're doing that and you're taking over full screen when the screen's small, but then you grow your browser bigger, it pops back into the standard menu. Like those little gotchas, we're just going to take care of everything. And then hopefully, even though you watch this to learn it, hopefully you can just take this pattern and use it in the future. You don't have to do any of this. So just check those comments. Doesn't look like there's any more. So the first thing I'll do is on this header here, I'll change that orientation to make it full screen. The way the responsive works is you have a style. So I have this header class and it's got these styles on it. And at these breakpoints, I can override them. So this right here, 768 is a tablet breakpoint, or there's a couple more here, or you can add any custom breakpoint. But if I go to the tablet breakpoint, it's going to show me the two styles that are already on it, and I can override them. In this case, I want to change the position, and there's not already a style in here. So before I put it onto the responsive size, I need to add it into this default size. So what I'm going to do is just go position, and position relative is fine. You could do like position inherit or something else to be less declarative, but that's pretty technical and you don't need to. In this case, it works great to just do position relative. And then at this breakpoint for 768 tablet, we can just say position absolute. If you hover over these, it tells you absolute what it is. Now, when it's position absolute, right now, actually, maybe I can show what it does right now. Let's see if this. It's hard to tell what it's doing. It kind of looks the same. But when it's position absolute, you can do different things with width and height and positioning, because position absolute means it's not affecting other things in the flow of the document. So position relative, it's at the top and things go below it. Position absolute, it jumps outside. It's like a layer over top, you can think of it as. So in this case, I have, when it's position relative, none of these styles will apply. So I'm going to put these all in this main device all section. And then when you switch to where it's position absolute, these styles are going to apply. So I'm just going to add top, left, width, and height. Top and left are both 0. So I'm going to set this absolute position div, which is the header, to the top 0 and left 0, top left corner. The width is 100% in this case of the screen, and the height is 100% in this case of the screen. Now you can see it's already popped in. So now you can see it's a normal menu that we just designed, including if I pull out further, it won't let me, but including that centered column, then it shrinks, and then it snaps to that full screen view. But this full screen view still isn't what we want, because if we were on mobile, it would look like that. We want these words, these menu items themselves to actually stack. So there's more to do, but for now, at least we know that's working. So that was on header. So if I come down into header outer, it's going to be basically the same thing. Header outer has a primary style class. I go into there. It's got this grid template columns. So this actually is controlling the layout of, like, saying like it's a 100 pixel logo and then one FR next to it. You could use this grid template columns. You could change that at 768 and make it stack. Or I can actually come into this tablet 768 size and just do display block. And what that'll do is that won't listen to any grid styles anymore, and it'll just stack. I bet if I did this, the logo is going to be huge. Oh no, I have a thing on it. So now the words, the menu items that were up next to the logo, when we get to 768, they go below the logo. So that's step one. And then we can come into this div menu, which has a primary class we created called header menu. And in here, same thing, it's flex, which puts them side by side. We can come in and we can either change the flex direction, that's one way, or we could just make it display block. That's another way that might work. So if I come in to the tablet size, instead of flex, hit display block. And there you go. It's going to show these all in a vertical line now. And so as you can see already, there's like we'll want to add padding and do some other things, but for the most part, that's a better looking menu. And if you go to a full iPhone size, it's more like that. But now, right now, if you tried to use this on a mobile screen, the menu is just like completely taken over and you wouldn't be able to see anything behind it. It's always taken over. So the next thing that's going to make sense to build is a mechanism to hide and show the menu. And so this is where we're going to use CSS to do most of the styling. What we're going to use JavaScript for, or Bildr actions for, flows, is the actual just triggering, just adding a class, which is going to trigger all the style changes, and then removing a class, trigger some style changes. So what we need to do is basically for this header class, we have the primary style class header. This is where at 768, it's taking over the full screen. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another class here that hides it. So when it's taking over the full screen, it's going to slide it 100% left and hide it. So I'm going to add a utility style class, which will override any of that primary style class. And this would be header hidden. So header hidden right now has no styles on it. If I do this one style, transform, translate X, negative 100%, you can see in the screen up there, that one style hides the menu. So like now on here, well, it's even hidden at the large size. It's totally hidden. So even at this large size, it's slid all the way to the left. We're going to work with that. That's probably all I'm going to end up doing. But I want to mention, because that's sort of a tricky property, although just copy this, transform, translate X, negative 100%. It always works. It's 100% of the element itself. That's a little bit tricky, but you could actually do tons of different things. You could shrink it down. You could margin left. You could opacity 0. I mean, you wouldn't want opacity 0 because you wouldn't be able to click through it, but you can do a lot more than just this. This is just a quick and dirty way to get it done. So I'm going to have that as header hidden. And you can see if I remove header hidden, it pops back in. When I add it, it goes out. What I'm going to do next, one last step, is on the main header class, I'm going to add a property for transition. We won't be able to see this just yet, but we'll be able to see when we demo it. This is what will actually, instead of snapping on and off, it will slide on and slide off. So to transition, it's like a shorthand property. You can say all, as in all properties. You could just specify some properties. I'm going to say all, and I'm going to say 0.25s for 0.25 seconds. So what that means is if any style is changed on this element, it's going to transition the values of that style for all styles for over 0.25 seconds, quarter second. So now, and then what I'm going to do, and then one last thing that's important. So remember, if I have this hidden class on, even at the bigger size, it's still always hidden. What I actually want to do for header hidden, I want translate X negative 100% when it's on mobile, but not when it's on desktop. So really the base default class I want is translate X 0, like that. And then I want to come into this 768 breakpoint and say translate X negative 100%. The reason for that might be a little confusing at first, but the reason to have that is because now when it's above 768, whether that menu has the hidden class or not, it's never going to get hidden. It's translate X 0. When you get below 768, the hidden class is going to apply. It's going to either do it negative 100%, or if you remove that class, it's going to snap back on. So you can see that, and you can see actually it's animating in because of that transition. So let's see. So well, now basically what we have is we have it covering the full screen like we want it mobile, and we have it when it gets small enough, it hides itself, so you'd be able to see real content, but we have no way to trigger it. So that's kind of the next step, which is creating like a system to trigger and close the menu. And this is, again, there's so many different ways to do this that depend on your app setup. And the way I set this up, where the whole header is sliding off, potentially even makes it a little trickier. But what I'm trying to do here, the goal, is I just want to have a button somewhere to open the menu. And then I can actually use that same button, change it to an X, change the action to close the menu. You don't have to use the same button. You can have two different buttons with actions bound, and you hide and show them. There's different ways to do it, but it's pretty straightforward, I think, to reset the interactions on them. So I'll do it that way just to show it. I think what that's going to look like is basically I'll kind of tinker around. I don't know the exact way with this exact setup. Like I said, I'm kind of doing this off the cuff a little bit, but let me I'll start adding this in. And basically what I think we'll do is we'll have to position it as step one, and then we'll have to handle responsive. So maybe like we'll hide it at some breakpoints or something, but we'll just get it in there now. And then once we get it in there, we link it up to the clicks, and we're actually almost done. We can go back and do some more, but most of the functionality is done at that point. So if I have this header here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a div, and I'm going to call this div menu trigger. And this menu trigger, or give it a class, because I'm gonna position it absolute or do something like that to position it. So I'm going to give it a class. I'm going to say header menu trigger. In that class, let's start with position absolute. This is what I'm thinking first, is if I do position absolute and left 100%, yep, positions it on that side. And let me put something in it. So let's just do text that says menu. So you can see it's white, but you can see it's positioning this whole div. So whatever's in it, whether I put an image of an X or an image of a hamburger menu, or I write the word menu, whatever's in it, it's going to be positioned to the right of that menu. And what my plan is I'll basically, when it's the full screen desktop menu, I'll hide this whole div, this whole menu trigger. And when it's down below, when it's smaller, I'll show this div. The reason being, when the menu is slid off to the left, this little word menu that's sticking out should still be visible. So I want to make sure that we can see it. So I'm going to actually change the color of it. Now I'm just going to type color black. My wife is calling me. Hang on one second. Let me just tell her I'm on a live stream. Sorry about that. So let's see. All right, so yeah, I got the menu here. So if I just look at this, if I scroll to the right and left, I don't know if you can see me scrolling, but I'm scrolling on my mouse. You can see that menu's up there. That's no good. So I want to hide that. But when I go small, cool, you can see it right there. So what I'll do is on this menu trigger, on this header menu trigger primary class, I'm going to add the base class for display, because I can't change the responsive unless I add it to the base first. So by default, it's going to be display block. No, by default, it's going to be display hidden. So it's hidden at full screen. And then at this 768, it's going to be display block. So if we do that, now when I'm at the big size, there's no horizontal scroll. When I get smaller, I can see it right there. Nice. And then what I'm going to do, because of the way I'm positioning that, this is again, like, I don't want to go too far into like details, but these are overlapping there. So you might have to make some adjustments in your app. And maybe you even want the menu on the right side or something completely different. But for now, just to kind of handle that easily, I'm just going to give this first heading here some margin top. Just so it looks okay when we're looking at it. Let me just check what my wife said real fast. Okay, we're all good. So let's see. Yep, so now I can see that menu. All right, so that's good. So now we have, this gets messed up sometimes. There we go. So now we have correct menu, menus hidden with this. Now let's make this click work. And so this is something we'll do in the header. So that's universal. We're going to add 2 flows. We're going to add a flow for show mobile menu, and we're going to add a flow for hide mobile menu. And the reason I do that is because you isolate those kind of, and now I can use those wherever I want in different ways. So let's go. All right, so, and remember I mentioned there's that hidden class. So on this outside header, we have header and we have header hidden. So that's how we're going to control how it shows and hides. So to show the mobile menu, we're going to add an action for remove class, remove style class. We remove the class header hidden from the header element. And then on the mobile, on the hide mobile menu, we're going to add that class back on. So this is kind of the basis for how this is starting. Header hidden on header. And then what I can do to start is on this menu trigger div, under the events tab, I'll actually have it show the mobile menu. So now when we click it, it'll show the mobile menu. So that should already work. Yep. So that's good there. There's no way to hide the mobile menu, and it's sticking out weird right here. So that's what I'll handle next. But for the most part, if I refresh, you're starting to see it pretty much come together. It's basically like this has cleanup now. This is just making sure we can close it. So it's full, there, opens. So what I'd like to do to make it open and close, again, this is like slightly tricky, but also I think pretty straightforward after it's done. So, so not too bad. And it's like a really simple way to do it. What I'm going to do is when this menu opens, I'm going to take this div for the trigger and move it over to here. That way we won't get the horizontal scroll. It'll be in screen. And then I'm going to change it from saying menu to saying X. And then I'm going to change it that instead of when you click on it, having it remove that class to open the menu, I'm going to say when you click on it, add that class. So I'm basically just going to switch it all around. And I already have the actions to do, the flows to do that. So in my show mobile menu and my hide mobile menu, in addition to actually showing the menu, I'll do some other stuff. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add a class to that menu trigger that moves it over. I could do it in here and just change the styles manually, but it's a little bit cleaner to add a class. So on this menu trigger div here, header menu trigger, and remember it's hidden because it's hidden at big screen sizes, so we can't actually see it right here. But basically I know that what I want to do is add a utility class. That's header menu trigger. I guess I'll call it menu trigger close. That's what it is. It'll be in the closed state. And actually, maybe this one is actually header menu trigger open. When that's closed, all I'm going to do is originally I had set left to 100%. So I'm going to remove the left property, so left inherit, and I'm going to set the right property instead to 1M. And what that does in CSS, if you're not familiar, is instead of starting at the left and going out, it starts at the right, comes in 1M, and it's kind of aligned right. But what that's going to do is that's just going to position it for me. So I want to start without the close class on. So we're basically back to normal in there. And when you show the mobile menu, I want to add class. I'm going to label these two. So this is for the trigger. This is for the header. And save. Trigger, we're going to add class trigger close to menu trigger. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set the interaction. We're going to set it for the menu trigger click event. Instead of normally what's bound by default on here, it's going to show mobile menu. When it runs show mobile menu, we're actually going to switch that so that now when you click on that same element, it hides mobile menu. And so that, whoops. So that will look like this. Well, I put it over here. So I did something slightly wrong, but it worked. I closed it. So let's see. So what I can do to show this, basically I try to do this blind. That's what I get. Header menu trigger close. Header menu trigger open is hidden right here at this large size. So if I switch this to display, that's where I'll see it. And it looks like, why is it over there? One second. Oh, because it closes on it. Oops. So header menu open is right there. And then close. Let's figure out why it did that. Left inherit right 1M. I know one way to fix it is to give it a width, but I don't know why that's happening. That's strange. But if I do width, this is actually kind of a cool trick. It's you have to do enter manually. So you type width, come in as 3 dots. Normally it's like this. Come in as 3 dots, you enter manually. If you do fit content, it used to not be super supported, but it's more supported now. Oh, that didn't fix it. What is going on? I'm gonna do this in a weird way for right this second to not lose flow, but I'll come back and try to fix this. So before, by default on the open, this is set to left 100%. If instead on the close I did like left 90% or something, it put it back in. It's like I'll do like this isn't very scientific though. Like you can't always trust this percentage. So I'm gonna come back and fix that. I just want to see if this works first. And then so that's there. Keep that off. And then let me just replace this as display none. Okay. Come down here, menu. All right. So yeah, see that 96% didn't work, but it's in there now. And if it were in further, you wouldn't be able to scroll. And if I click it again, it opens. And I didn't change this yet. So if I click this, nothing will happen. So just to finish that out before I go fix that little glitch there, in the flows in show mobile menu, we added these 2 things to change the style class of the trigger and change the interaction. And actually, let's add a third one, set element value. And instead of it saying menu, well, I would say X. I'm actually going to write it like this, ampersand times semicolon, which just gives you a nicer X. It's like the actual like multiplication sign X. It's like a little better than the typing. But anyway, and that's the trigger. But anyway, yeah, so we did these things to that trigger, and we didn't do them on hide mobile menus. So now this trigger gets set that when you click it, it hides mobile menu. When it actually hides here, we can remove that class on the trigger. Oh, whoops. This is the header. This is the trigger. We can remove close from menu trigger. We can set the interaction, click to show, and then we can set the text, set value. This back to menu. And this is where maybe you'd want to use like a hamburger menu. I actually forgot to and just type the word menu. Once I test this works though, I'll go fix that styling. So menu, open, X, close. Actually, the styling works here, but I don't know if it would work at all with, so it was pretty good actually. But there you have it. Basically, that's like good to go on desktop, and that's just a preview bug. Good to go on desktop, gets down to mobile. And if you open it with the mobile open, it's going to come back to desktop. When you close it, it remembers. So it's kind of a cool little menu. The important part, or like the really cool part, is that in here, if you add a new menu item or two, it goes into both. So that's like the key, is that you're only maintaining one spot now. And like, you know, you're going to style these differently. So you're probably going to add a few more 768 width breakpoints and change the styles. But for the most part, you know, depending on how your design is, you can usually get away with leaving them pretty similar. All right, so that's that. And I think, let me just check some stuff. So it's 3 now. So that was like the major component to get in. I want to look at why that X didn't work, because it kind of bothers me. And maybe maybe I'll still save that. But for the pattern, that'll be fixed. It won't be like a weird 96%, because I just don't trust that. Plus, if you change it from the X, it wouldn't work anymore. Anyway, so maybe I'll check that out. But I think the other things that might be cool to cover that I wanted to, if I could, would be a drop-down menu on one of these items, like something you can apply to other items if you want. And then we can talk about swapping stuff out based on user. So I think, I don't know if, let's see. I don't know if there's a way to get feedback on what I should do, but I might as well keep going on at least this drop-down and just build it. Obviously, if you have to go, no worries. This is like the hour mark, which we try to hit, but I think I'll keep going for now. So let's see. So drop down. So what I'll do is I'll add a quick version of a drop down that's not super styled probably, but just kind of show how it works. And maybe afterwards I'll clean up all the styles, because I did want to make this look a little nicer. Maybe I'll just do that for the pattern too. Anyway, here's how this menu is working. So we've got this outer menu, header menu, and inside we've got these menu items. So inside of a menu item, right now I have home. If I want to add a drop down, I can actually add a div inside of this menu drop down. And this div here is going to become the drop down. It's going to start hidden, but it's going to become the drop down. So I'll give it a primary class because I want them to be all the same. Of header menu item drop down. And the key part of the drop down is that it's positioned to absolute. So if I go position absolute, you can see it's right there, and absolute means it's not affecting the menu anymore. And so just to give us like an example of something, I'm going to stick a div, and I'll just stick with the links for now. A link in there, and then duplicate it. So now you can kind of see up in the top, and maybe you can see here, there's these links here that are coming down. If I give this a background color, it's going to start looking like a drop down. So I'm going to come into the header menu item drop down, background color. Now I'm just going to say black, and give it some padding. So you can see it's really looking like a drop down. And if I want maybe like a min width 100%, that's not necessary. Oh no, that's not what I want. Oh, actually, this is a good point. This is like something cool to show. So I did that min width 100%. It's taking 100% of the closest ancestor, the closest parent element that has a position. So on these menu items, I have this class header menu item. I'm going to add position relative, which is just going to control, it's going to make sure that everything in these div menu items stays contained in itself. So you can see when I added that position, it changed the width of this child here, this drop-down child that I had at 100% width. So anyway, that's looking good there, but by default, we want this hidden. There's two ways to do this. Depending on what you want in your app, you can use the actions for hide and show, which would snap. So you'd have an invisible, it would look like this actually. You'd have no menu there. When they click on it or hover over a menu item, it would snap into place like that. Or you can use the other method we used to slide the menu in and out, where we add a class. And what I like to do when I'm setting things up, I kind of know, like, in the future, if what I'm building gets bigger, I would want maybe a transition that seems logical. So I usually set it up with a class, but sometimes in that class, I'm just display none, display block. And it looks as if it's snapping, but I usually set up the class. It's a small amount of work up front for like a big payoff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set a utility class for header, menu, item, drop down, hidden. Again, use your own naming conventions. And actually, I see in the chat, right as I said that, can I share more of my naming patterns? I have this system, like, I recommend it because I like it, but by no means, think it's universal. Everyone kind of does their own thing. But I have a system where I usually do, like, the main component of what something is. So if there's a header out here, I'll have a primary class called header. Anything inside of the header that is for that header, I'll name with, starting with header dash. So like in this header outer, it's like header dash outer. And then sometimes I might say like header dash outer dash menu, but in this case, I just did header dash menu. But that's just a way to organize. And if it's something that's going to be more universal, like if I have menus all over my app, I might just call this menu instead of header menu and use that class universally. It's more just like an organization thing, so that when I look at the class name, I know exactly what it's for. And even to the point where, like, if I see header menu as a class and I know I built that class, I know that it's safe to edit it, and it's only going to edit in the header. If this class would have been called menu and I came in to edit it in the header, I might be like, oh, that's probably in other places besides the header because it's not called header menu. So that's just little things I do, but it's not a super robust system. And then basically what I try to do for elements and flows and everything is just name everything as descriptively as possible. So I usually keep, like, on these elements, it's a div. I usually keep the word div in there and just type the name of it after, that kind of thing. That way it just helps me see what things are, but that's total personal preference again. And then, yeah, I mean, workspaces, I don't have any. I just name it whatever's inside of it. And in this case, like, I'm only using this workspace. Pages, I usually name, like in the Bildr project where it has a ton of different sections and stuff, I usually name it in similar, like studio dash header dash something. And again, if it's used in a bunch of places, then I leave that out. It's just called something, that kind of thing. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, so so all I'm going to do now is just set up a class to hide these menus. So we have menu drop down, and then I just made menu drop down hidden. In this case, I'm going to do something also tricky. I'm going to say transform scale y 0. And out on the main drop down, I'm going to set the transform origin to top center. So again, that's like some tricky CSS. Although once you see it, like if you just copy this, it's not tricky. It's actually just two properties. But that's like some tricky CSS that basically says when it's hidden, we're going to shrink it vertically. So we're going to scale y down to 0. And then I put the transform origin at the top center so that if I didn't do that, it would shrink into the top corner. But now I just want to shrink into the top. So that's basically that. And then just like the header, we'll add a transition property. And again, I'll just do all 0.25 seconds. Transitions are something that you should probably revisit. Like the all 2.25 seconds is a very generic transition. You can add things at the end like ease out, and even add things that are quadratic easing functions, which really that's like what makes the UI snap, is like really tweaking those little details so that the menu doesn't just slide in, but it kind of slides in and slows the end, or slides and snaps back, that kind of thing. For now, I'm just doing generic for this demo. So in this case, we're not even talking about the header. We're talking about the menu that comes up and down. We're just going to shrink and grow it at this 0.25 seconds, all properties. So now that's pretty much set up. I'll label this drop down. I'm going to keep hidden on it because I want it to start hidden. But what I need to do is I need something to trigger that. So I'm going to create, similar to the header stuff we're doing, I'm going to create flows for each menu item that I want to drop down on. I guess I should mention, you could do this purely with CSS and do other ways where you don't have to create these flows. I found that's like how I would approach it coming from a code background, but I found like as using Bildr over time, sometimes it's just easier to do the Bildr way and make several actions. Like you're only going to have a handful of menu items in your menu. So you make some actions for them and it's just really easy to control, really easy to edit, really easy for other people to come in and edit. So I just do things that are more straightforward. So instead of using CSS to hide and show these dropdowns, I just use JavaScript actions. It's just as good in my opinion. So anyway, we're going to create actions for basically, we'll call it show dropdown home and hide dropdown home. Show dropdown home is going to just add that class to the dropdown. So we're going to add dropdown. Oh, wait. Show it is going to remove the class. Sorry. We're going to remove dropdown hidden from the home dropdown. And then hide dropdown is going to add that class dropdown hidden to the home dropdown. So now that we have those in place on the actual word home, the part that's visible, we can set some events. So you can set it on a mouse enter to show the mobile menu. Or actually, you know what? I don't want to do it on this link home. I want to do it on this whole menu item. So what we're going to do is I'm going to set on mouse enter of the whole menu item. We're going to show mobile menu. And on mouse leave of the whole menu item, we're going to hide dropdown. Oops, sorry. Show dropdown home, and we're going to hide dropdown home. The reason for that is this menu item, the dropdown is inside of it. So if we put it on the menu item instead of just that link that I was about to put it on at first, the dropdown will also count as being hovered over. So when the dropdown's open and you scroll down and you move your mouse down over it, you're still hovering over this menu item. Your mouse hasn't left, so it won't hide the menu. If you leave the dropdown or leave the word home, that's mouse leave, it's going to hide the dropdown home. Now, these are two that you need to do it on mouse over, which is probably what you want. I also usually add a show on click. And the reason is on mobile where there is no mouse over, the click, I mean, like Safari iOS, they account for this for you and make it work anyway, but you can be explicit and make that click work. So it's a little better for, it's not just mobile, but like any kind of screen or screen reader that doesn't have a mouse pointer. It's just good. I usually just put on the click also. So let's test it out. So we got this. If I click here, it's going to show that drop down. Oh, and I forgot that that's a link. So actually what happened was I clicked it and it went to the link. So in real life, if you're doing a drop down, you probably don't want this to be a link. So this home here, if I can keep it the same and remove that link value, and now it won't have any href property. And if I click it, it'll just do that. And now the mouse leave did not work for some reason. So I'll check that. But oh, you know why mouse leave didn't work? Because I'm in mobile. If I'm on this is where mouse over and mouse leave works. So that's kind of like the basic way to do a drop-down menu. The only other consideration besides styling it, because you can position it in different places, you can make the way those look different. There's so many things you can do. You can have it be like that full screen, kind of like jumbo menu takeover. But one thing that you will need to address most likely is when you get down to the mobile size, that position absolute on the dropdown may or may not work for you. It's probably going to look like it works, but I don't think it really would be good in practice. So I click this home. It doesn't even work. So it looks like that. So what I want to do in a situation like this is on this dropdown class, we have this main header menu item dropdown. We have it positioned absolute, but at that 768 breakpoint, we can just switch that to position relative. And that should, so you can see there, that should take care of it. Now, I don't know how that's going to treat. I guess I click out for mouse out. Oh, you know what? Position relative will not work, actually. Maybe what we can do, the reason position relative won't work is because if I leave it position relative, it looks like this. It's like showing that space, because when you scale Y, it's not actually hiding it. It's just collapsing it, but it's like leaving its space that it would have taken. So it looks good when it's open, but not when it's closed. Oops. So what I can do is, instead of that, we'll leave that there, and then maybe on hidden. No, that's opposite. All right, so maybe what I'll do is I'll put that back in. Let's see if this works. And this is really true to form, like how I build normally. Like I never really know what I'm doing and just trying stuff. So let's go back. I'm gonna put it so it's position absolute normally. On mobile, it's position relative, but when it's hidden and mobile, all right, let me put this base in. So when it's hidden, it's position absolute. When it's, yeah, that's all I need to do, I think. Let's see. I don't think that worked. So let me not do it that way. My bad. Let me just remove this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about that a second and treat that in a better default way for the pattern. It's probably like the problem really is that nice. The problem is that I used translate Y or scale Y to scale it down. So I'll probably need to actually change that part, but it doesn't make sense to go back into that now. The point being is like you'll have to treat that, because the thing is, for your design, which is going to be different than this anyway, you're going to want to do different things and treat that differently. But I think that probably that covers all that stuff. There was the question about handling different things for different users. I don't think I'll build it into this, but I can talk about it and talk about the philosophy behind it pretty quickly, which is basically that when you come into this header page, every time this header loads, you have a page load flow, which runs this page binding flow. So you have two spots that are going to run by default where you can put actions, other flows. And what I would do is I would come onto the page binding flow and I would do a condition. And there's two kinds of conditions. Jeez. There's a lot in here, actually. There's two kinds of conditions in this case. There's compare values and switch. So if you have several different user types and say that there's a column on your user, it's called user type, you could do a condition switch where you would check the user type here. So you'd actually have to get it, like, from current user info, whatever, but it'll be called type. And then it'll let you run flows depending. So if it's type 1, you run that flow. If it's type 2, you run that flow, that kind of thing. Or you could use, if you have only two different types, so it could be like, well, there's a special case for signed in, not signed in. But if you have two user types, say like admin and not, you could do compare values if you wanted. Almost the same thing, but you say from current user value, whatever it is, if that equals admin, run one flow. If not, run a different flow. So that's the basics of how you'll do a condition. But what I do in this scenario is I'll create flows for like the different states. So imagine if you have two different user types. You have admin and like regular user. I'll create a flow that's called set state admin. And then in this set state admin, I'll run whatever I need to. So I can change styles, I can add, remove classes, I can hide, show things. I'll just switch it all up in that set state admin. And then on the page binding condition flow, if their user type equals admin, I run that flow set state admin. If not, I run set state normal or whatever. So you can just do that kind of thing. And the only other thing to mention there is a special condition that takes care of this for you for if you just want to say, is there a user or not a user, signed in or not signed in? So that's this condition user signed in. All you have to do for this one is just pick the flow to run when they're signed in and the flow to run when they're not. So there's a couple different options there, but that's essentially how you handle it. And like I said, you might have a whole doubled header where you're hiding and showing different headers. Sometimes that makes sense. Or you might just change elements on the same header. I would most likely change elements in the same header, but I will say that on the Bildr, on this redesign, this header up here, we do something similar where we switch out the whole header and we wait to run the page bindings of it based on what page you're on. So you sometimes need to get more complex. So hopefully that answers your question about that. I mean, it's kind of like everything in Bildr where there's a million ways to do it and it really depends. But the way we like to answer is we like to say like, oh, let's see your project and just walk you through it for that specific project. All right. So for this, I don't know if there's oh, hang on. I got some questions maybe in here. So in this case, would you have a separate page of menu options? If you're changing things, you might. Yeah, it really depends, actually. If you're changing enough that it makes sense to have a separate page, you can do a separate page. If you're just changing like a few items, you might just like hide, show specific items, that kind of thing. It really depends on what's actually changing. And then the most secure way of doing it is, so if you have, say you have this menu here, it's in the header, or maybe I can even talk about this one. This div menu here has like these items. You could actually create a thing where if there's a signed in menu and a signed out menu, you could load a page into this menu. You can either put a component in there and bind it by default, or you can run, there's an action called load page. What's it called? Open page. Open page in a container v2. If you use this method where you open a page into a container, so you can put a blank div or you can put a component, then you create a separate page which contains all of this menu stuff, and you can call it signed in menu. Create another separate page with different menu stuff, call it signed out menu. Then what happens is you're going to load pages into this menu div. You're either going to load signed in or signed out. But the trick would be, and let me just remove this so I don't forget. The trick would be that on the actual new pages you create for signed in and signed out, on the signed in page, if you go to the page properties, there's this authentication tab. So you could actually toggle this on. And that way, even if somehow they tried to hack it to where it brings in that signed in page, Bildr will not allow that signed in page to come from the server to the browser because the user is not authenticated. So you can do something like that. If not, if it's not a user and you don't have that authenticated checkmark, you can basically you can use the same method where you're loading pages in, but you can basically just do other checks and only load for certain things. It gets a little trickier. If you want to be really actually like very secure, you need to restrict stuff at the collection level. There's like settings in the collection. And there's stuff you can do. I find that like the level of security that I usually feel comfortable with is just loading a different page in. So it's like if they're signed in, load in the signed in menu. If they're not signed in, load in the signed out menu. They're not going to be able to inspect element and see the wrong menu. They're not going to be able to see it really, so it's not going to be there. But technically, if they really knew Bildr, they'd be able to actually go in and look at the Bildr functions and understand that you're doing that, and they'd be able to do it. Kind of a long shot, really. But if your stuff needs to be secure, then you would have to do it in a more secure way. I'd say it's probably out of the scope of this thing. And then just read through, just making sure I finish on these comments. Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. 5 to 6 versions of the menu sounds like basically when we did for the Bildr menu. So this menu that's at the top here, if you're in the studio or a pattern view, it's going to load specific things which have like a lot of actions in them. So it's like a very different menu. If you're in the dashboard, it loads one that's less menu items. If you're in the education page, it loads a different one, etc. And so we did the thing. So that's basically like it's similar to 5 or 6 user types, like 5 or 6 situations where the menu is vastly different. So what we did was we start with a blank one, and then we run a condition based on what page it's on to load in the right menu. And then at the right time, so like in the studio, other stuff loads first. At the right time, we trigger the page binding of the header. And so in a way, basically the reason I'm mentioning it is because it's more advantageous for us to do that because we can control the page binding rather than load everything in one binding and then hide and show those different things. We're controlling what actually gets bound. So sometimes you have to do that. And if you have 5 or 6, it sounds like you might. And yeah, sometimes I let everything render and load too. And I usually do it opposite, which is just like a small tip. This is what Junix is saying here. We're basically like, I'll have a bunch of stuff and I'll do display none and let everything load and then do some conditions, do some checks and show the things that need to be shown. You can do it the other way too, where you hide them, but then they don't flash on and off. But yeah, I think all that, it's like all personal preference. And it's all too, the other thing that to note in situations like this is you might want to build it in the more simple way. And then as your app evolves and security becomes more of a concern, you can actually just upgrade that security, change the method that you're doing it to be more secure. That's another thing. I think people often overcompensate on security in the beginning of a build, like before they even have a single user. So it depends on the nature of their information, but I would say like keep it straightforward, as easy as possible to get it done, and then as needed, layer in that security. So anyway, I think that's it. I don't know. I can check, and no one's really chatting with me in the Bildr chat or anything. And I think that's pretty much all I wanted to cover for this video. So hopefully we can repurpose this into some other stuff. Like we want to have a pattern out of this. So then in the future, you can just use the pattern. So what I'm going to do is in those couple places that I had little questions, I'm going to go make sure everything's buttoned up, but we'll share this as a pattern as soon as we can. And then I think, share this video and all that other good stuff too. But if you have any questions after this ends, just chat me in Discord. I've been sort of like heads down building this release. I've been sort of out of Discord, but I'm going to make sure to get back in there and get caught up with everything. And then, yeah, we'll let you know when this releases. But for now, I'll stop the broadcast. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks for commenting. Hopefully I can answer all the questions, and hopefully everyone can learn something from this because it's often asked. All right. Thanks again, and see you next time.